Hello, it's Alister McGrath again, introducing another presentation which is designed to help you get the most out of using my textbook, Theology, the Basics. And this fourth presentation deals with the third chapter of this work, focusing on the theology of creation. Now, the Apostle Creed declares that God is creator of heaven and earth. So, the topic of this chapter is, what does it mean to say that God is creator, and what are its implications? So that's what this chapter is all about. And the theme of God as creator, of course, is of major importance for Christian theology. It's important, for example, in the Old Testament, which thinks of creation as establishing order and overcoming chaos. And that's why the Old Testament so often portrays creation in terms of an engagement with and victory over forces of chaos. God is seen to impose order on something that is shapeless or random, as for example in the first of the two creation accounts in the book of Genesis. And this theme of creation as the establishment of cosmic order is represented in two main ways in the Old Testament. First, the imposition of order on a formless chaos. It's rather like a very familiar image, a potter working clay into a recognizably ordered structure. And the second way is that of a divine victory over the forces of chaos. And in the Old Testament, it is often framed in terms of God defeating or conquering a dragon or another monster. So how do we visualize this idea of creation? And there are a number of ways which we find helpful in picturing the way in which God created the world. And each of these casts some light on the complex and rich Christian understanding of the idea of creation. And I'm just going to look at three in this presentation: creation as emanation, creation as construction, and creation as artistic expression. So let's look at the first of these, the idea of creation as emanation. Now, you may be saying, emanation, what is that? And that's a good point. This term was widely used by early Christian writers who were sympathetic to the various forms of Platonism which were around at the time to clarify the relationship between God and the world. And it's not really a familiar image for us. The image is really that of light or heat radiating from the sun or a fire. So think of a candle burning in the dark. And as it burns, it radiates heat and light. The candle is a source of light, but it doesn't itself require illumination. And that's why patristic writers found this to be a helpful analogy. Just as light derives from the sun and reflects its nature, so the created order derives from God and expresses the nature of God. So on the basis of this model, there is a natural, or if you like, an organic connection between God and the creation. But the model has some weaknesses. There are three I can think of. First of all, the image of a sun radiating light or a fire radiating heat implies that this emission just happens. But the Christian tradition has always emphasized that the act of creation didn't just happen, it results from God's decision to create. And this model, I think, doesn't express that at all. But this leads me on to the second weakness. The model of emanation is very impersonal. It's not easy for this model of emanation to convey the idea of a personal God who expresses this personality both in the action of creation and in the subsequent creation itself. But for many people, it's the third problem that's the most important. And frankly, the idea of emanation just seems weird to us. We don't think like this anymore. It may have been natural for some Platonists in late classical antiquity to think like this, but it seems strange to us today. We need something that fits in better with the way we think nowadays. So let's look at a second approach, which I think you'll find easier to visualize: the idea of creation as construction. The second model is that of construction, and many biblical passages portray God as a master builder, deliberately constructing the world. For example, Psalm 127. And it's very accessible, this image, and it conveys the ideas of purpose, planning, and a deliberate intention to create. And we see this idea in William Blake's very famous watercolour, The Ancient of Days, which depicts God as a cosmic architect. And this way of thinking, I think, brings out the skill and the wisdom of the Creator, as well as allowing the beauty and ordering of the resulting creation to be appreciated. But there's a problem here, and it's this. This approach portrays creation as God constructing something out of pre-existent matter. Just think about it. If you're a builder, you use bricks or stones to construct a building, and those bricks or stones, well, they're already there. They're already in existence. You take something that's there and you do something with it. Now, many pagan writers, including Plato, understood creation as giving shape and form to something that's already there. And that idea causes at least a degree of tension with the Christian idea of creation from nothing, often referred to using the Latin term ex nihilo. Yet I think this model still manages to express the insight that the wisdom of God as creator is in some way expressed in the natural world. In particular, the idea of ordering, that is, the imparting or the imposing of a coherence or structure to the material in question, that's clearly affirmed by this model. So whatever else the complex notion of creation might mean in a Christian context, it certainly includes the idea of ordering. And that's an idea that's really important in the creation narratives of the Old Testament. So we come to the third model, and this model is artistic expression. Again, artistic expression. And many Christian writers at various periods in the history of the Christian church speak of creation as the handiwork of God, comparing it to a work of art which is both beautiful in itself, but which also points to the wisdom or the skill or the personality of its creator. And this model of creation as the artistic expression of God the Creator is particularly well expressed in Dorothy L. Sayers' famous work of 1941 entitled The Mind of the Creator. So what does this image do for us? Well, the image of God as artist conveys the idea of personal expression in the creation as something that is beautiful. Now, there are weaknesses with this approach. For example, the model could easily lead to the idea of creation from pre-existent matter, as in the case of a sculptor who creates a statue carved from a block of stone that's already there. However, I think the model is still helpful. For example, it helps us think in terms of the analogy of an author who writes a novel, or a composer who creates a melody or a harmony. So what are the key themes of the Christian doctrine of creation? It seems to me there are three key themes we need to bring out clearly. First of all, the Christian understanding is about origination. What I mean by that is that the world has not always existed. It came into being not accidentally, but by an act of will. And that clearly leads us to the second core theme, that of intentionality. The universe didn't just happen, it was made to happen, and it was meant to happen. And the third aspect of the whole idea of creation is that of signification. The universe, the creation, is like a signpost which points to its creator. If you like, it points beyond itself to its ultimate source and origin. It echoes or expresses the character of God in a scaled down yet recognizable manner. The universe bears the imprint of God, revealing something of the divine splendor and wisdom. And the biblical text that's very often cited here is Psalm 19. The heavens are telling the glory of God, and the firmament proclaims his handiwork. Now you can see how important this would be in developing the spirituality of nature. In other words, allowing the beauty of nature to be seen as a pointer to or a sign of the greater beauty of God. We can look at magnificent vistas in nature, like mountains or flower-strewn meadows, and we allow these to stimulate and inform our thinking about the majesty and beauty of God as creator. Creation pointing to creator. But we can also draw on the analogy of human constructions to get a better sense of the importance of creation in disclosing God's wisdom. So let me explain what I mean. So let's pick up on the analogy of God as an architect, which we noted earlier. I'm based in the United Kingdom, so let me give you a very British illustration of this that you might find helpful. Back in 1666, the Great Fire of London badly damaged the original St. Paul's Cathedral, and a decision was taken to commission a new building. And Christopher Wren was the architect selected to be the designer. The new St. Paul's Cathedral, completed in 1710, remains one of London's most famous landmarks, and I'm sure many of you watching this video will recognise it. For several years I worked at King's College London, a university in central London. I often visited this cathedral because it was very close to where I worked. I'd enjoy its elegance and its beauty. But I would often hear visitors asking cathedral staff where they could find a memorial to Christopher Wren within the cathedral. Why, they asked, did the cathedral not include some acknowledgement of its designer? Yet, you see, it's the cathedral itself which is the proper memorial for Wren. Look at this tablet, which is located within the building. I'm going to translate a key sentence of the Latin inscription on this tablet. Reader, if you are looking for a memorial, look around you. Do you see the point it's making? Wren's wisdom and skill are best appreciated by admiring the masterpiece he created. The creator's genius is seen in the creation itself. And you can see how this analogy can easily be adapted to make a connection between the beauty of creation and the wisdom of God as its creator. Now, I hope you found this overview of some of the themes in this third chapter of Theology, the Basics helpful. So let's look at the structure of this chapter so you can read this on your own and think more about its central ideas. There's a lot of interesting material for you to explore here. So we begin by thinking about creation in the Old Testament, looking, for example, at the idea of ordering, and then move on to look at creation in the New Testament. And then we focus on this central idea of creation out of nothing. What does that mean? And we also look at this dialectic between creation and dualism. What's that all about? Then we look at models of God as creator. We've touched on this in the presentation. The chapter takes you further. And then begin to look at a theme that's really important theologically: humanity and creation, the idea of the image of God. What does that mean? Why is it important? And then we look at creation and natural theology. If God created the natural world, is there some way in which the natural world helps us think about God? A really interesting but also rather controversial question. Then we ask, what's the relationship between creation and creationism? Fascinating question at the moment. I hope this section will help you think about this in more detail. And finally, as with every chapter, we end by engaging with a text. And in this case, we look at a really interesting document from the Reformed theological tradition. It's the Belgic Confession of 1561. and it's reflecting on the question of how God can be known both through the Bible and through the creation. And I think you'll enjoy exploring that idea. Now, obviously, there's a lot more I need to say on this whole topic of creation. There's just the beginning of a much more detailed conversation, but I hope you'll find this introductory presentation helpful. I look forward to speaking to you again soon. Thank you so much for listening.